I cordially dislike allegory in all its manifestations. I much prefer history, true or feigned, with its varied applicability to the thought and experience of readers. I think that many confuse applicability with allegory, but one resides in the freedom of the reader, and the other in the purposed domination of the author. If anyone ever tries to tell you that the One Ring represents the nuclear bomb, that orcs are Nazis, or the War of the Ring is the First World War, someone will field this quote in the comment section as definitive proof that they are wrong. Tolkien did intensely dislike his friend and contemporary C.S. Lewis's The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe for exactly this reason. Okay, hear me out. And then the lion came out and, like Jesus. Yeah, it's subtle, because the lion died for Edmund's sins, kinda like Jesus. Like Jesus, yeah, do you get it? You get it? Oh, I get it. You're dead to me. Tolkien said, "It is sad that Narnia and all that part of C.S. Lewis's work should remain outside the range of my sympathy, as much of my work was outside his." Tolkien believed that allegory, making a one-to-one analogy between a part of your story and something else, usually in our world, like Aslan equals Christ, is a weak narrative device, thinly veiling what you want the reader to believe. As he puts it, he calls it the purposed domination of the author. And now that I've addressed that damn quote, if a single one of you post it down in the comment section, I swear I will come to your house and I will— But this one quote often leads people to the ridiculous conclusion that Tolkien did not imbue his work with symbolic meaning or intention. That nothing in Middle-earth has symbolic, thematic, or narrative relation to anything from our world or history. This is false.
Keep your mouth shut.
The One Ring does play a role in the story with thematic and symbolic depth, but Tolkien isn't necessarily that concerned with whether you figure out what that is. As Tolkien writes, if I were to philosophize this myth, or at least the Ring of Sauron, I should say that it was a mythical way of representing the truth that potency, or perhaps rather potentiality, if it is to be used and produce results, has to be externalized and somewhat passes out of one's direct control. A man who wishes to exert power must have subjects who are not himself, but he then depends on them. Tolkien is talking here about the idea that gaining or exerting power means you become dependent on, or even vulnerable to, others and things outside of yourself, and that is reflected in the role the ring plays in the story. In other words, Sauron's lust for power and desire to exert himself over the world by creating the One Ring are what ultimately make him vulnerable to the Fellowship's plans. Even though the One Ring makes Sauron leagues more powerful by exerting influence over its bearer and possibly even swaying them to his side, that itself is a risk and vulnerability. It makes people want the ring, which is precisely what gets it destroyed. Frodo taking the ring for himself and then Gollum biting off his finger to take it back, both fully corrupted by the ring, is what leads to its destruction as Gollum dances over the edge. But this is only one of the symbolic meanings of the One Ring in the story, and it's somewhat surprising, given most people read it as simply representing temptation or power, but it reveals that Tolkien had a much more nuanced intention behind how the ring is used narratively. He goes on to say that, "You can make the ring into an allegory of our own time, if you like. An allegory of the inevitable fate that waits for all attempts to defeat evil power by power. But that is only because all power, magical or mechanical, does always so work. See, the ring is not so much a symbol of power, but a thesis on power in the ring's narrative role, it seems." Also, I do need to point out that in this quote, he literally says you can see the ring as an allegory for something else. So, make of that what you will. He builds on this externalization of power idea by having characters across the story tempted to use the power of the ring to defeat Sauron, Boromir and Denethor most memorably.
Give Gondor the weapon of the enemy. Let us use it against him.
However, in line with Tolkien's philosophy, the narrative firmly rejects the idea that using the ring will ever work, but not because the ring lacks the power to do so. Instead, the inevitable fate is that the more powerful one is, the more susceptible you are to its corruption. If any of the wise should with this ring overthrow the Lord of Mordor using his own arts, he would then set himself on Sauron's throne, and yet another Dark Lord would appear. This is why Galadriel and Gandalf have these dark and even horrific moments of temptation.
You cannot offer me this ring.
I'm giving it to you!
Don't tempt me, Frodo.
In place of a Dark Lord, you would have a queen!
Tolkien doesn't just see power as a corrupting force, but corruption as an inevitability of unrestrained power. But one of the most interesting, and often missed, allusions of the One Ring is how Tolkien likens it to a machine. He draws comparisons between magic and the One Ring and machines numerous times throughout his writing. By the last, I intend all use of external plans or devices instead of development of inherent inner powers or talents, or even the use of these talents with the corrupted motive of dominating, bulldozing the real world, or coercing other wills. Secondly, the machine is our more obvious modern form, though more closely related to magic than is usually recognized. And thirdly, both of these, alone or together, will lead to the desire for power, for making the will more quickly effective, and so to the machine, or magic. These three quotes make the connection between machinery, magic, and the One Ring pretty damn clear in Tolkien's mind, and this line to his son during World War II may indicate where this comes from, or at least it states it most explicitly. The First War of the Machines seems to be drawing to its final inconclusive chapter, leaving, alas, everyone the poorer, many bereaved or maimed, and millions dead, and only one thing triumphant: the machines. As the servants of the machines are becoming a privileged class, the machines are going to be enormously more powerful. Now let's put aside the real Terminator vibes that we're getting here. He calls World War II the First War of the Machines. Tolkien saw machinery and technology as an easy way for people to increase their power, to destroy the natural world, and that it was being used to coerce others. Tolkien saw machinery and industry at the heart of environmental disaster and the systematic slaughter of millions in war. But crucially, it put distance between people and the destruction they caused and made the execution of that destructive will far more efficient. For this, the One Ring is a surprisingly apt analogy, a created machine designed to coerce the minds of others and make executing your will more efficient. Saruman and Isengard also support this comparison as a cautionary tale of industry. The One Ring is not a straightforward allegory for machinery, but it clearly reflects ideas that Tolkien had around industry. Tolkien saw the temptation and ease with which Europe was falling into these more deadly and efficient wars in this emerging world, how easy technology had made it, and much like how he notes at the end of the war, there is only one triumphant thing: the machines. And likewise, Tolkien described how no matter who uses it, the ring and all its works will endure. It would have been the master in the end. Building on this, the One Ring's role in the story also demonstrates what unrestrained power as a corrupting force does to those wishing to do good. We're given a glimpse of this in Galadriel's
You would have a queen!
moment, but perhaps the better example is in Boromir or Denethor, who each wished to use the One Ring to defend their homeland on the front lines. They had a genuine plea, but Tolkien saw that attempting to use unrestrained power for good is inevitably far worse. In Boromir, the desire to do good justifies harming those more vulnerable than you in a strictly utilitarian calculation. What we see with Frodo is just foreshadowing of what would have been. In Denethor, the desire to do good leads to mistrust and hate for those he does not personally rule over. The good becomes detestable. A really good quote from Tolkien touches on this point. They would have built up an empire with great and absolutely subservient generals and armies and engines of war, until they could challenge evil and destroy it by force. But the ring and all its works would have endured. It would have been the master in the end. Whoever uses the One Ring would have remained righteous, but self-righteous. He would have continued to rule and order things for good, and the benefit of his subjects according to his wisdom. Thus, while Sauron multiplied evil, he left the good clearly distinguishable from it. Using the One Ring for good would have made the good detestable and seem evil. Using evil things for evil is bad, but using evil things for good means we kind of lose or forget what it means to be good in the first place. But even so, the One Ring clearly does represent a great power, symbolically and magically, and perhaps what it represents most is best reflected in how it is destroyed. Firstly, the power that has kept the ring alive for so long is that nobody can willingly destroy it, starting with Isildur all those years ago when they first threw Sauron down. Yet the grand irony is that Gollum and Frodo both wanting the ring inside the maws of Mount Doom is what gets it destroyed, and Gollum's glee over finally attaining it for himself leading him to dance over the edge, a glee caused by his addiction to the ring. Secondly, Tolkien has spoken repeatedly of how Frodo showing mercy to Gollum and sparing his life inadvertently led to the ring's destruction. In other words, Tolkien concludes his thesis on power by demonstrating that though evil may grow powerful, it will, in time, destroy itself. It is not a great power that destroys the ring and shapes Middle-earth for the better in Tolkien's eyes, but the unforeseeable acts of will and deeds of virtue of the apparently small, ungreat, forgotten. Hobbits. The One Ring is no single thing. It is not a nuclear bomb, that's true. It is not a Nazi secret weapon either. It is a complex thesis on what it means to become powerful, power in the age of the machine, the inevitability of corruption, what it means to do good, and how evil is undone. This idea that Tolkien's work is enriched with identifiable meaning without ever being allegorical is thread through the body of his work. Though Tolkien has explicitly stated that neither the First nor Second World Wars directly framed The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, John Garth observed that it is plain as a pikestaff that his own memory of he and his friends being scattered across the battlefront, cut off from each other in their worst ordeal, infuses his account of Frodo and Sam, Merry and Pippin as each takes his path through fear and peril. Likewise, Tolkien even conceded that the dead marshes and the approaches to the Morannon owe something to northern France after the Battle of the Somme. The Battle of the Somme being the most violent and devastating battle of World War I, with over 1 million casualties in just 140 days. Often they floundered, stepping or falling hands first into the waters as noisome as a cesspool, till they were slimed and fouled almost up to their necks and stank in one another's nostrils. Walking through a dark swamp strewn with thousands of dead bodies, this passage reflects the grim experience of those venturing across the Somme. The point is, while Tolkien may have not created Middle-earth and its story with an allegorical intention behind it, meaning can still be divined. The Dead Marshes are not the Somme, nor is Frodo Tolkien, but these narrative moments can be analogized to better understand The Lord of the Rings from Tolkien's perspective. To put it in Tolkien's words, of course, allegory and story converge, meeting somewhere in truth.